Hollywood loved Marlene Dietrich. Germany called her a traitor. Hitler wanted to pull her famous German face back to Nazi Germany. She refused him. Then she put on a uniform, walked into Allied military camps, and sang for soldiers who were fighting the country where she was born. By then, Marlene Dietrich was no longer just a face on a poster. Her American passport named a new country. A uniform replaced the studio gown. At Allied camps, she stood before soldiers with dust on their boots and letters folded inside their pockets. The microphone was no longer on a nightclub stage. It stood before exhausted soldiers preparing to fight Germany. And years later, outside German theaters, her name would appear beside flowers, police lines, and protest signs. In America, her name could glow above a theater door. In Germany, that same name could still make people spit out one word: traitor. Hollywood knew how to sell her. A cigarette between two fingers, a fur collar near the face, a man's suit cut sharply across the body, a gaze that made her look as if no one in the room could own her. But during the war, that face on the poster became political. Nazi Germany wanted famous German faces. It wanted artists, singers, actors, and symbols that could make the regime look powerful and cultured. Marlene Dietrich had the language, she had the name, she had the face, and she had the fame. So when Hitler's Germany wanted her back, she stayed away. She did not return to serve his image. She became an American citizen. She raised money. She helped refugees. She traveled to military camps. She sang for Allied soldiers, including men who were fighting Germany. For those soldiers, her voice could warm a freezing night. For many people back home, that same voice sounded like betrayal. After the war, America remembered the performances. France honored her. Hollywood kept the legend polished. But Germany did not remember her the same way. When she returned, the welcome split in two. Some people brought flowers, others brought signs. Inside the theater there was applause, outside there were insults. One audience came to honor a legend, another came to punish a traitor. That split followed her for the rest of her life. Hollywood loved her because she looked untouchable. Germany never forgave her because she could not be owned. And that leaves one brutal question. What happens when the world applauds your courage, but home calls it betrayal? Before Germany hated Marlene Dietrich, Germany exported her, not with a speech, with a film reel. The image began in Berlin, inside smoky rooms where cabaret tables sat close to the stage and men watched performers as if the night belonged to them. Then came the Blue Angel. A professor walked into a nightclub and lost control. A singer sat above him, bored by the damage she caused. Her name was Lola Lola. She did not chase anyone. She waited. Men came closer. Then they fell apart. That role gave Marlene the object Hollywood wanted, a woman who looked like temptation but behaved like judgment. Josef von Sternberg knew what to do with her face. Light from above, shadow under the cheekbones, a head turned slightly away, a mouth that never hurried. He did not film her as if she needed the camera. He filmed her as if the camera needed permission. Then came the move west. A suitcase. A contract. A studio portrait. A German accent being sold to American audiences as danger, elegance, and distance. Paramount did not market Marlene Dietrich as ordinary. It sold her as a woman no man could fully reach. A face from Berlin. A voice from another room. A body dressed like a challenge. Hollywood loved that. The posters made her look cold, expensive, and untouchable. But inside that success was a problem waiting for the next decade. Germany had given her the language. Germany had given her the first stage. Germany had given her Lola Lola. Then Hollywood made that German face famous around the world. By the time Hitler rose to power, Marlene Dietrich was no longer just an actress who had left Berlin. She was a German image with American reach. Too famous to ignore. Too useful to release. Too visible to leave alone. The face Berlin had sent away was about to be called back. Not for a movie. For Nazi Germany. Hitler wanted to pull Marlene Dietrich's famous German face back to Nazi Germany. He did not need her to act in a great film. He needed her to appear in the right place. A photograph would have been enough. A return to Berlin. A public smile. A headline saying Germany's most famous woman in Hollywood had come home. That was the value. Not art. Possession. The streets in Germany had changed by then. Flags hung from buildings, uniforms filled public rooms. Artists learned which names could still be printed, and which names had to disappear. Jewish actors, writers, musicians, and directors were pushed out of the culture they had helped build. Marlene watched from abroad as the country of her birth turned itself into something harder and darker. Then the pressure around her name grew. Germany wanted its famous daughter back. But it did not want her as a free woman. It wanted her as a symbol. She stayed away. Her refusal did not sit quietly inside a private opinion. It moved into papers, passports, interviews, money sent to people who needed escape, names written on refugee documents. A German-born star began using her fame against the country Hitler was building. She became an American citizen. Her new passport did not erase Berlin, but it told the world where she stood now. That was the part Nazi Germany could not use. A glamorous German face was useful only if it obeyed. Marlene Dietrich did not obey. She did not return for Hitler's cameras. She did not lend her name to the regime's image. She did not become the beautiful proof that famous Germans still belonged to him. The old posters still existed. The studio portraits still looked perfect. The cigarettes still rested between the fingers. But the meaning had changed. A face that had once sold movie tickets now carried a political insult. Hitler wanted her back. She chose the other side. And soon she would do something more dangerous than refuse him from a distance. She would stand in front of the men sent to defeat him. The next Marlene Dietrich stage did not look like Hollywood. There was no velvet curtain, no studio floor, no perfect light built around her cheekbones. There were military trucks, mud, cold air, temporary platforms, field hospitals, men with dirt on their uniforms and fear hidden under jokes. Marlene went to them. The studio gown was gone, the uniform was real. The audience was no longer made of critics, photographers, and men in evening clothes. It was made of soldiers who might not live long enough to see another show. She stood in front of them with a microphone and a song. The microphone was no longer on a nightclub stage. It stood before exhausted soldiers preparing to fight Germany. That image is the center of the chapter. A German-born woman, a famous Hollywood star. A voice from the language of the enemy. Standing with the Allied troops, she sang Lily Marlene, a German song known by soldiers on both sides. That made the moment stranger and stronger. The song had crossed lines before she did. Now she carried it into Allied camps. For the men listening, she was not just entertainment, she was warmth in a freezing night. She was a break from fear. She was proof that Germany did not belong only to Hitler. But every performance sharpened the accusation waiting for her at home. The soldiers remembered her, the camps remembered her, the photographs remembered her. And later, Germany would remember too, not always with gratitude. She had not made a careless remark in an interview. She had not simply moved to America and stayed silent. She showed up. She sang to the men fighting the country where she was born. Hollywood had made her famous. The war made her dangerous. When the applause ended in the camps, the story did not end with it. The men went back to battle. Marlene went on to the next performance, and somewhere behind the front lines, the word that would follow her for decades was already waiting. Traitor. After the war, the flowers still came. They came through stage doors. They waited in dressing rooms. They filled hotel tables after concerts. The applause was real. So was the hate mail. That was the price Marlene Dietrich carried into the years after victory. One envelope could praise her courage. Another could call her a disgrace. One newspaper could remember the troops. Another could drag the old accusation back into print. The same woman could be honored in one country and condemned in another before the week was over. A medal could sit in a drawer. A bouquet could lean against a mirror. A headline could call her brave. But in a hotel room after the show, the other letters still waited. They did not ask about the songs. They did not care about the lighting. They did not want the movie star. They wanted the German woman who had stood with the enemy. That was how the war followed her indoors. It moved from battlefields to envelopes, from troop camps to newspaper columns, from public applause to private accusation. For American soldiers, she had crossed danger to sing for them. For many Germans, she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The cruelty was not that everyone hated her. They did not. The cruelty was that the anger was loud enough to keep returning. She could finish a performance, step backstage, remove the gloves, look into the mirror, and still find the war waiting on paper. The face in the mirror was older than Lola now, still famous, still controlled, still expected to walk out the next night as if none of it had touched her. That was the work after the war. Not just singing, not just touring, not just being glamorous. She had to keep appearing as Marlene Dietrich, while people argued over what Marlene Dietrich meant. The stage gave her flowers, the hotel gave her letters, and between those two objects, the rest of her life began to narrow. The tuxedo did not begin on the stage, it began in the dressing room, hanging on a hook, waiting under the makeup lights. Black fabric, white shirt, gloves on the table, powder near the mirror, a glass, a cigarette, pills close enough to reach. Outside, the audience waited for Marlene Dietrich. Inside, a woman prepared the version of herself they had paid to see. The collar had to sit correctly. The shoulders had to look sharp. The face had to hold its angle. The voice had to arrive as if it had not traveled through years of war, pain, hotels, and accusation. That was the trick. The audience saw the tuxedo. They did not see the room before it. They saw the stillness. They did not see the effort required to stand that way. They saw a woman who looked untouchable. They did not see what had already touched her. For Marlene, clothing was never only clothing. It was control. If Germany wanted to call her traitor, the tuxedo did not answer back. It simply made her look too cold to be wounded. If Hollywood wanted the goddess, the tuxedo gave them one. If the audience wanted mystery, the mirror helped build it before she ever stepped through the curtain. But the body under the fabric was not a poster. It carried travel, stage strain, old injuries, loneliness, aging, the dull cost of performing the same legend night after night. The tuxedo did not make her safe. It helped her walk out as if nothing had touched her. That is why the dressing room matters more than the entrance. Before the applause, there was preparation. Before the image, there was labor. Before the legend stepped into the spotlight, a woman had to arrange herself into something the public could still believe. Then the curtain opened, the shoulders squared, the room went quiet, and Marlene Dietrich walked out, looking like control itself. But control has a limit. Sooner or later, the stage asks the body for something the image can no longer give. When Marlene Dietrich returned to Germany, the argument was no longer in newspapers. It was standing outside the theater. A ticket in one hand, a protest sign in another, flowers near the entrance, police watching the crowd. Her name printed on the poster. Her name shouted from the street. Inside, people had come to hear the legend. Outside, others had come to punish the traitor. That was not a bad review. That was homeland rejection. Marlene arrived with more than songs behind her. She carried the American passport, the troop camp photographs, the Allied performances, the years of refusing Hitler. The crowd carried its own memories, bombs, defeat, hunger, occupation, shame. And for some of them her voice did not sound like courage. It sounded like a German woman singing on the wrong side. The theater door became the line between two versions of history. On one side applause, on the other accusation. On one side, flowers. On the other, signs. The same name appeared in both places. Marlene Dietrich. To one audience she had stood against Hitler, to another she had sung for Germany's enemies. She could step onto German soil. She could perform in a German theater. She could hear applause from German seats. But none of that meant the old home had taken her back. That is what made the return so brutal. She was present, but not restored. Famous, but not forgiven. German, but not fully accepted as German anymore. The stage still worked. The tuxedo still worked. The voice still worked. But outside the building the protest signs said what applause could not erase. She had survived Hollywood. She had survived war. She had survived being useful to everyone else's argument. But Germany gave her a different kind of wound. It did not remove her fame. It made her carry fame without belonging. And after that return, the stage became less like a home and more like a place she had to keep conquering. until one fall took even that away. The end of Marlene Dietrich's stage life did not arrive like a final bow. It arrived with a fall. The lights were still there, the audience was still watching, the performer was still supposed to belong to the room. Then one wrong moment cut through the image. A step, a loss of balance, a body no longer obeying the legend built around it. The stage had always helped Marlene hide the cost. It gave her distance. It gave her light. It gave her the right angle. A fall took all of that away at once. The poster still showed the woman standing perfectly. The body behind the poster could no longer obey. Afterward came the objects that do not belong to glamour. Doctors, X-rays, canceled shows, hotel rooms, medicine bottles, assistants speaking quietly, a schedule that could no longer be trusted. For decades, Marlene had controlled how people saw her. She controlled the clothes, the lighting, the photographs, the entrance, the exit. The fall broke that control in public. It did what insults had not done. It did what protest signs had not done. It pulled her away from the stage. At first, the world still had the old materials. The films, the records, the portraits, the tuxedo, the songs. But Marlene had the damaged body, and the damaged body began making decisions the legend could not overrule. That is why the fall matters. It was not just an injury. It was the beginning of disappearance. A woman who had turned every entrance into theater now began removing entrances from her life. Fewer appearances, more distance, more refusals, no careless photographs, no public weakness if she could stop it. If the world could not see Marlene Dietrich properly, then the world would see less and less. The story moved from stage light to closed curtains, from applause to telephone calls, from public legend to private room. And that room was in Paris, behind a door that would become the final stage of her life. In Paris, the door stayed closed. The apartment replaced the stage, the telephone replaced the spotlight, the closed door replaced the entrance. Outside that room, the world still wanted Marlene Dietrich. Journalists wanted a last look, fans wanted a sighting, old friends wanted access, history wanted one final scene. Inside, she gave them mostly a voice. The phone would ring, the voice would answer, the body remained out of reach. That was the rule of the Paris years. People could have the old photographs, they could have the records, they could have the films, they could have the tuxedo preserved in memory, but they could not have an ordinary old woman caught by an ordinary camera. The room held smaller objects now. Curtains, medicine, letters, old photographs, a bed, a telephone close enough to reach. The public image of Marlene Dietrich had once been built from light. Now it was protected by refusal. She had spent her career deciding what the world was allowed to see. At the end, the decision became harsher. Almost nothing. No ruined face for tabloids, no weak body for strangers, no final collapse offered up as entertainment. That final privacy was not simple peace. It was lonely, it was stubborn, it was controlled. Berlin was still behind her. Hollywood was still behind her. The Allied camps were still behind her. The German accusations were still behind her. Paris became the room where all those places stopped at the door. But a closed door cannot keep death outside forever. When Marlene Dietrich died, the private room became public again. The woman who had refused the final camera now had to leave Paris. And once more, Germany entered the story. The question was not only where she had lived, it was where she would be buried. Marlene Dietrich died in Paris in 1992. The door opened. The body that had hidden from cameras moved through the world one last time. Paris had kept her final years private. Now the coffin had to go somewhere. Hollywood had loved the image. America had honored the choice. France had given her refuge and respect. But Berlin had made her. Germany had accused her. And in death, Germany received her. That is the final cold turn of Marlene Dietrich's story. The country that could not agree on her memory became the place of her grave. A coffin can cross a border, a grave can hold a body, a stone can carry a name, but none of those things can force a country to agree on what that name means. At the cemetery, the argument did not need to shout. It was already carved into the life that brought her there. Marlene Dietrich, Berlin-born, Hollywood-made, American by choice, honored by the Allies, condemned by many at home. The stone could hold her name, it could not make Germany agree on what that name meant. Some saw the grave of a woman who stood against Hitler when it mattered. Others still remembered a woman who sang for Germany's enemies. The war was over. The verdict was not. That is why her ending does not feel soft. She did not lose fame. She did not vanish because the world forgot her. She withdrew after a lifetime of being watched, used, celebrated, and accused. The films remained, the songs remained, the tuxedo remained, the cold face remained in photographs. But beneath the image was a woman who paid for choosing the side. History would later praise. Hollywood loved her because she looked untouchable. Germany never forgave her because she proved she could not be owned. And in the end, Marlene Dietrich left one brutal question behind. What happens when the world applauds your courage, but home calls it betrayal?